Hey there, it's Michelle Caruana from Play Cafe Academy and Profitable Play. And I have a very special video for you today because this is a little bit of a diversion from the content I normally share on this channel, but I think it is so refreshing and so needed. So something that we've been talking about a lot in my Playmaker Society group, which is my membership for Play Cafe Academy students, most of whom are currently open or who are close to opening. Something that we've been talking about a lot is wellness of the business owner, right? So on my podcast and this YouTube channel, we talk a lot about, marketing, business health, key performance indicators, sales, all that good stuff. But we don't talk enough about the physical, mental, and emotional health of the business owner. And I am so excited to dive deeper into this topic today. So my guest in this video today is Kelly Hale. And Kelly is an OT and a nervous system regulation expert with a million different credentials that I will let her talk about in just a moment, but she also has a brick and mortar practice. So I thought her expertise and her experience was the perfect combination to discuss this topic with you today. So again, I am so excited. So in this conversation, we are going to talk about some warning signs of burnout, some things you might notice in your physical, mental, and emotional health if you are reaching that burnout point. She's going to talk about some techniques to pump the brakes and roll back that burnout. And she's also going to talk about some really specific strategies and techniques on how you can prevent that in the future, or how you can prevent it from ever happening if you are still in the beginning phases and it hasn't really crept up on you yet. Because being a brick and mortar business owner is just so much more difficult and taxing than you can ever imagine before you open your business. And I don't mean to scare you if you are one of the prospective owners that follows my channel, but if you are a current owner, you know exactly what I mean. When you are an online business or a local service-based business that doesn't need a physical location, sure, you have subscriptions and softwares and all sorts of costs associated with your business, but it truly is nothing like having a physical space that has a rent, that needs constant physical repairs and constant upkeep. And it's just so different from being physically present in your space, managing team members, being face-to-face with customers all day. Sure, that's great at times, and it's why we do what we do, right? To bring smiles and play to our community, but there is also a dark side, and we really need to be careful about taking care of ourselves, or that darkness can manifest in other areas of our life, like our relationships, our families, and our physical health. So again, I think this is such an important topic, and I am so excited to dive into it today. Now, this is going to be a very active interview, so we're going to get up, we're going to do some actual exercises and nervous system regulation techniques. So just to warn you, this is going to get really specific. So if you have, comfy clothes on, you are all good to go, but really just come as you are. And I absolutely love the practicality of this interview. I walked away with so many things that I can implement into my daily life, whether it's, again, just nervous system regulation techniques or nutrition strategies. So I am very excited to implement. And if you leave this conversation wanting to learn more, I have linked all of Kelly's resources and all of her social media accounts in the video description, because I know I'm excited to learn more. All right, without further ado, here is my conversation with Kelly Hale. Hi, Kelly. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be with your amazing community and to share and hopefully support them on their journey.
All right, well, we are very happy to have you as well. So before we dive in, do you want to just get started by letting everyone know who you are and who you serve in your business?
Sure, I'm Kelly Hale and I'm located in the Metro Detroit area. I come to the nervous system regulation work. I'll go there because I think that's what we're going to focus on most of all today. I come to nervous system regulation work and gut health with a unique background. I love that nervous system regulation is really a hot topic right now. And I like to be very clear that I come at it from a true developmental perspective. As an occupational therapist, that's the foundation of our training. Human development and how it starts. Hopefully it goes well, but bumps come up along the way. And I work primarily with adults, and I see that the challenges they have, whether it's physical or mental, emotional, because OTs are trained in the mental health and the cognitive health, that very often we can trace it back to a root cause of nervous system regulation. And I also support gut health, and it comes from a nervous system regulation viewpoint as well. I have some training in gut health from fermentation and nutritional aspect. I will say right away, I'm not a dietitian. I'm not a full-fledged nutritionist, so I refer out for that. But I really bring a personal journey with gut health and professional supporting people around that from, again, the nervous system regulation, and then how are we nourishing ourselves from the inside out, doing a lot with the gut flora and the microbiome.
All right. And I am so excited for this conversation. But before we really get into it, can you explain a little bit about why we should care about this and why this conversation is so important? And most people listening, as we were chatting about a little bit offline, most people listening are either brick and mortar business owners or they're prospective brick and mortar business owners. So they're looking to open a business in this space. So, why is this something that we should really prioritize and consider?
Yeah, that's a great question. A couple things on that. I had a brick and mortar. I still have a brick and mortar, but it's much smaller scale. I downsized, or as I like to say, right sized after 14 years with a larger model. So I feel like I can relate to that on a personal as well as a professional level. And so I think your question was, why should the professionals in your arena, which I want to just go on a side note for a second. I want to give some love for this community because I need to point out to you how very important the work that you're doing, providing movement, play, developmental experiences. I am a big fan as a mom. My daughter, we did lots of time at the local ones in our area, different and unique, and we had birthday parties at some of them. I mean, they were a huge part of my daughter's early childhood. And I'm also a big fan as a professional because as an OT, I have great concerns that children aren't getting the movement opportunities. I had to search high and low to find a developmental play based preschool. And they're hard to find because there's so much wanting to teach preschoolers to read, which is wrong because their ocular muscles aren't developed till age 7. But that's another topic. But what I want to say is that your work is very vital to the communities. And I hope that you're helping educate your communities about why that is so, because parents need a place like this to come together as community. They need this place for their children to have the opportunities that they may not be getting in their early childhood development and education. So that's huge. But back to your question, you are providing this vital service as a business owner or soon to be. I love that you're supporting the newbies. And I think, oh my gosh, I wish I'd had some of these tools I'm going to share today when I started out. How different would my early journey had been if I'd had that? But you are providing this service. In my mind, it's a wellness, it's a community service. Again, it's vital for the development of our future generations. And it can be hard on the back end. The show must go on. You walk out there, the smiles on, but behind the scenes, you're trying to manage so much. You're wearing all the hats as a business owner and you're dealing with stress early on. You might be thinking, oh my gosh, I have to make payroll again. And all of these employees that I have to take care of, as well as the community. Oh, and wait, what about myself? And that's usually what comes last, right? Because we're a service profession, we're providing for people. So it's very easy for our nervous systems to get dysregulated. It's very easy for us to get in that stress cycle. And what happens is we're living in survival mode. We're in that fight, flight, freeze, and we don't even realize it. And, fight, flight, freeze is really important service that our body, our nervous system has established so many years ago for us. And it's great. But the challenge in today's modern living is that when the saber-toothed tiger moves on, right, that image of the saber-toothed tiger, the major stress or even a minor stress that we perceive as a saber-toothed tiger, when they move on, we're still functioning as if that tiger is there. We're still in fight, flight, freeze. We are in that place. And so our body's continually in that cycle. So what that means is that our nervous systems are dysregulated. And that can show up in a lot of ways. For business owners, I see it as, stress, irritability, difficulty sleeping, difficulty digesting, feeling emotional roller coasters come through when normally you're a pretty grounded person, feeling overwhelmed on the regular. And those, if you kind of trace those down and look at those are usually tied to nervous system regulation, or actually in this case, dysregulation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, What are some signs other than, just that gut feeling that we're in survival mode? What are some signs if we're not really, as used to recognizing them? What are some signs that we may be putting our body in this fight, flight, or freeze mode? How can that kind of manifest in our daily lives?
Yeah, that's a great question, Michelle. So, what happens is when we're in fight, flight, freeze, we don't sometimes slow down to recognize it. We're just pushing through. And trust me, I lived a lot of my life here, like just go, go, go. Well, I just need to work harder. I just need to work longer. I just need to push more. And I got myself sick doing that. We can talk about that at some point if you want, because this is something that people will see as their business owners. But again, the irritability, other things I didn't talk about yet, difficulty concentrating. Maybe the short term memory doesn't feel as good because you're trying to juggle too much. The mental load becomes overwhelming. Now, if we unpack the fight, flight, freeze, fight might be you're more argumentative with your loved ones because you got to smile for the front line out there in your business, right? But when you get home, you might be a little more irritable and a little less willing to, slow down and talk through things. You might be cranky with your family, with your kids. So that would be the fight. The flight might be the person that cannot slow down and not relax. That was me. I know I had to really learn to relax. And a big part of it for me was nervous system regulation. And so you can't really ever sit down. You can't ever really take a deep breath and relax and be at ease. And then the freeze is someone who maybe is stuck. They don't want to get out of bed. They feel depressed. Now, if that's going on, you certainly want to get some medical support from that, from a healthcare provider. But they can feel those days where it's just so hard to get out of bed. They're losing some of their joy and their interest in the things that give them, real purpose. And I know most of the people in these businesses, I've talked to some of the owners of these businesses when my daughter and our friends and whatnot were going to these awesome play spaces. They do it for the right reasons. They've got the passion, they've got the drive. But then when you get on the other side of it, no one prepares you for how much effort, how much it can be. And that's why it's so great that you have this community, the podcast, and everything you're doing, because wow, what a great service to support them so they know that they're not alone and they can get the tools to help them move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you. It was born out of necessity because, when I owned my business, I didn't have any support. I felt completely alone. I felt totally isolated because even though there were businesses similar to mine around the country and world, I wasn't really connected with any of them. We were all operating as silos. So I'm so glad I was able to bring, so many of us together in a collaborative community because again, you really don't know how much support you need until you're in the thick of it. And usually until it's too late and you're working yourself into the ground, you're facing health problems. So if you don't mind, I would love to hear how that manifested for you because I think a lot of people listening and a lot of people in that burnout, they're not necessarily drawing a parallel between their physical health problems and their nervous system regulation or their daily stress. So I would
Mhm.
love to hear an example of what that looks like because again, maybe someone listening is experiencing it, but they just haven't made that connection yet.
Exactly. Yes. And I think a lot of people just don't slow down to notice, right? And that's why a lot of my nervous system regulation work, we actually take a few moments to notice and drop in. And that I can talk about if we go through some ideas for techniques. But my story, again, super hardworking. When I opened my business, my brick and mortar, I was in my 20s. And I always joked that I was either brave enough or stupid enough. Like I really didn't know what I didn't know. I just knew that I was passionate. I love the work that I did. And I needed to get out of the factory of traditional rehab where we had a patient or a client every 30-ish minutes. That's not the kind of care or service I want to provide for anyone. So I, was doing the full-time gig still clinically and then moonlighting and then working on the weekends to get ready to open that brick and mortar. And I was truly doing things that now I would never recommend. My daughter, anyone I know would not recommend do this. I mean, when I opened the brick and mortar, I was working 7 days a week. At first, I was a one-woman show, and then I was hiring support team to be answering the phones, and then hiring and training other practitioners. So before I knew it, I was dealing with health issues. My adrenals were depleted. I had undiagnosed celiac, which is a little side story that goes with that, but I was so busy I couldn't really stop and notice. But my space, we'd have the movement space where the treatment was provided, and then we had an office. And in between sessions, I would go in and I was like, oh my goodness, how am I going to go out there and provide another session? I want to be up, and each person deserves to have that consistent energy, and I need to be on for them. But I'd be back in the office, sometimes doubled over from pain from the undiagnosed celiac, and just run into the ground. The cortisol was running all the time. I mean, I couldn't sleep at night, or I would wake up in the middle of the night because of the cortisol. And sure enough, I was diagnosed with adrenal issues. I was diagnosed at that time with fibromyalgia, lots of joint pain. I was diagnosed with gut issues, candida, autoimmune situations, up and down, right? And I'm happy to tell you now that I am in a much better place. And I wouldn't even say that I have fibro. I would say it was something I went through and worked through. And I know that if I don't balance myself, those types of symptoms can kind of show up again. So I have to be very mindful of that. But it was a really rough time. And then I'm piggybacking on that. I was dealing with fertility issues. So that was all happening at once. And I would go to these fertility specialists and they would say, you need to relax, you need to meditate, you need to do yoga. And I was like, well, I'm a Pilates girl. I love yoga, but I'm really more Pilates. And then I would try to meditate. But again, the cortisol was really high and the incessant chatter. And then I would feel like a failure because I couldn't meditate. And that I always joke that I'm a former meditation dropout or failure, but now I can sit in meditation after I do my nervous system regulation exercises because I had to meet myself where I was at. I had to, really say, okay, if you can't sit in stillness, then what do you find to be therapeutic? And it was really movement because I had been dancing since an early age. It was a huge part of my life. And I wanted a type of moving meditation that spoke to me, but nothing quite did it for me. I would fall asleep in meditation. I'd fall asleep at the end of yoga. So I had to go out and create it. And that's where I brought occupational therapy, early development, brain gym, reflex integration, and created this whole body of work. Now
And
that's my
go
sorry.
ahead.
I was just going to say that's my story, but I have many, many stories of people I've served. And I can see a lot of myself in their stories. And a lot of times I do work with men that have burnout, but I will say it's a greater proportion of women who are dealing with burnout because the mental load, even if we have partners who are super engaged as we move forward in life, there's just a lot that society and ourselves expect ourselves to do. Like I was telling my husband recently about mom guilt. He's like, wow, I don't really understand that. And I'm like, yes, I'm having mom guilt because I didn't do XYZ. I knew she was in good hands, it was taken care of, but it's like this, it's wired in us, right? So I was trying to explain that to him. And again, I've served so many people on their journeys who've come through similar situations and really, truly nervous system regulation and very often getting um, aligned with gut health is a huge part of what helps them to move forward and live that vibrant life that they deserve. And the thing is, it's so easy. A minute here, a minute there of nervous system regulation can really add up and be profound in your day.
Well, I am very excited to talk about those techniques because I think what you just said will resonate with a lot of people. Something I hear all the time from people I work with, especially one-on-one, because we get a little bit more personal. A lot of what I hear is, I open the space for my kids so that I could enjoy more time with them, and it's actually completely taken me away from them. And even when I am physically with them, I'm not present with them. So again, I think a lot of people can relate to that because a lot of us are parents of very young children. So this is one of those very unique businesses that, a lot of brick and mortar businesses don't attract parents of young children, right? This is a very unique scenario where we're kind of wearing, yes, all of these hats, but very stressful, very high needs hats all at the same time. So I think this industry specifically really suffers from this quite a bit. And before we get into the techniques, just for anybody who is completely new to this topic, can you explain a little bit what cortisol is and what effect it has on the body, just to kind of set the stage for the future discussion?
Sure, absolutely. And I just want to go back and acknowledge that feeling of the person who started the business to have more time with their family, and yet they feel pulled in so many directions that they can't be present for their family. And I see that a lot in the field of OT, PT, rehab. I serve a lot of health, wellness, movement practitioners, Pilates practitioners. I feel like there's a lot of similarities in the business owners that you work with and the people that I serve as well. So not to go too nerdy into cortisol, but it's really a hormone that is released when we're under stress. And we should have this. This is an important function that we have cortisol. But what happens is when you wake up in the middle of the night at 2 in the morning, and I do this from time to time, and I think it's 5 or 6, and I'm like, oh, time to go. I'm ready. I'm wide awake. And then I look at my watch because we don't put any phones in our room because that can really disrupt your nervous system. But I look at my watch glowing in the night and I go, oh my gosh, it's 2:30. But my body is jacked up. It's ready to get up and go about the day. And I think a lot of people can relate to that experience of cortisol being off. You can actually have your cortisol tested. One of the best ways is a saliva test. It's kind of a pain. You have to spit in a tube at different times during the day. You even have to like do it late at night. But you can see if your cortisol is off. You should have some cortisol coming online in the morning. You shouldn't have it late at night. It shouldn't be showing up in the middle of the night, right? So cortisol is an important function that we have, but it can get out of balance. So hopefully that helps with the idea. I don't want to go too far off track with it, but that's just kind of the basic real life application of cortisol. And if you've been running on a stress mode, if you've been pushing for a lot of days, weeks, months, years, I was living in the place of years, then you're going to find that your cortisol is most likely out of balance. Now, your traditional physicians, healthcare providers, PAs, whatnot, they're probably not going to do the saliva test. So you're probably going to need to step over into more of the functional medicine holistic, but it's worth it to really understand. I have it tested and again. I also am a huge fan of the Dutch test, which looks at hormones more deeply. And since a lot of us in this space, I imagine a lot of the people you serve are women, they're going to have these hormonal fluctuations. And they're probably at a stage in their life, maybe in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, where their hormones are starting to shift, right? And so having that information and kind of keeping track of that, and then using some nervous system regulation tools to dial down your cortisol and really make sure you're taking care of it, having the data can be a really good thing. But if you don't have time to go get the test, I get it. I'm overdue for some of my regular healthcare appointments. You can just start doing some of these techniques and maybe feel like your cortisol is, you just feel less revved up. You'll know when your cortisol is high. You kind of feel like you've been drinking coffee, but you haven't. Right?
Yes, absolutely. So let's go ahead. I think we're all, on the same page now. I just started learning more about that this year. So I just wanted to make sure we, again, set the stage for people who are brand new to this topic, because this is something we don't usually talk about on this podcast. But let's dive into some techniques. If we know we're kind of living in survival mode, if we're starting to feel that burnout, or we're wanting to prevent feeling that burnout, what are some techniques that we can use for that cortisol regulation and nervous system regulation?
Sure. I have a few favorite techniques. Now, I know we're on video, so I'm going to show it, but I also can get people to a short 3 video series I have that actually teaches this so they can see it and not have to try and, we want them to watch the video of this, of course, but in case they can't get to it and they want to go have that, just go quickly to that technique. So a lot of times the cortisol can be traced to those survival states. And going back to early development, there are some survival reflexes. Now, I don't want to camp out on reflexes too much, but when we're born, we're moving through reflexes in utero, we're moving through them the first few years of life. And with typical development, we're going to integrate them so they go in the background. And those reflexes provide scaffolding, meaning, okay, when I get this reflex down, then I can build this one. Oh, and then I get a motor skill. I can now sit in tripod. I can now crawl. I can now walk. And hopefully, most of us as adults probably did work through all those. Now, today's world's a little different because those kids are in a lot of containment and they're not, or the parents are afraid to put them in tummy time. So they're not moving through all those reflexes and it'll show up. That's why it's so important, again, that these kids have free open play in the spaces you're providing, because they're going to move through in ways that will help their nervous system integrate those reflexes. But as adults, trauma, illness, stress, hello, that's what everybody is dealing with, right? In this community is the stress of the back end of owning a business. Car accidents, all sorts of things can trip up those reflexes that were in the background. And one of the biggest reflexes tied to stress and survival is the fear paralysis reflex. Now, again, if you work with any OTs that work with and PTs that work with young children, they'll sometimes be talking about reflexes because maybe a kiddo missed one or two. And that is very important. I always refer to my friends and colleagues that work with those early stages of life. But again, I'm working with adults and seeing that their reflexes are tripped up and they're experiencing anxiety and stress. So the one of the best ways to integrate the fear paralysis reflex is just a simple tapping exercise. Now, I'm a huge fan of EFT, and actually that 3 video series I talked about has an EFT technique with sensory exercises layered in. But I just want to be clear, this is not EFT. This is just a gentle tapping technique with a particular rhythm that supports the fear paralysis reflex. So you're going to put one hand on your breastbone and then take the other hand and put it over top of it. Now, we're going to do a simple cha-cha rhythm. Don't worry, you don't have to be a musician or a dancer. I'll talk you through it. We're just going to tap here. So we're going to tap 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Pause, deep breath. Switch to the other side. I'm just layering a little crossing over movement into this. And we're going to do it again. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Pause, deep breath. For those of you listening, what we're doing, the top hand is over the bottom hand, the palm is on the breastbone, and we're just tapping that top hand onto the bottom hand gently. Go ahead and switch it. Let's do it again. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Pause, deep breath. Now, I do want to emphasize gentle because I've been surprised. I'll have people that I work with in 3D that come into my space and they'll be tapping super hard. And I know it's because they really are stressed and they want to, I'm going to do this super hard. I'm going to give it 150% like I do everything else, which I can appreciate, but that's counterproductive. So then I just gently say, what would happen if you could just tap a little bit gentler? How would you do this on someone you love? Very gentle, right? Now you could stop there and be done and have the effects, but let's take it one step further. Let's go to the upper arm. If you cross your arms across the chest and have your hand on the opposite upper arm, then slide down about a third of the way. Right here, we're going to do the same thing. So it's 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Pause, deep breath. And again, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Pause, deep breath. One more time. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Pause, deep breath, and relax. Now, we didn't go through the noticing the pre-activity and the post-activity, but a lot of people will find when they do this, make sure you don't do it when you're driving, obviously, but when they do this, they're going to feel different. They might feel calmer. They might feel more grounded. Now, I just taught you the abbreviated version. There's a whole sequence that goes all the way to the feet, but this is enough to get you started because when you're at work, behind the scenes in the office, you shut the door, you only have time to do the breastbone maybe. And if you're lucky, you might go over to the upper arm. But even to the breastbone is going to be a huge way to dial down the stress. It's going to dial down the anxiety. It's informing and nourishing your nervous system so that it doesn't have to be in survival mode. It's saying, hey, wait a second, you're safe, you're okay. I will often, well, my daughter's 13 now, but when she was younger and had trouble sleeping, I would often do this one for her. I'd put her on my lap and just gently put my hands on the front body and do this with her. And that's the beautiful thing about this community because you might be working with the families and the children and you haven't had a chance to do your exercises yet like this. And you say, oh, I'm going to just take at the top of every hour, like I've got all these ideas for your businesses, but at the top of every hour, you step out from behind wherever you're at or whatnot and say, okay, it's time to move our minds to help our bodies, however you want to call it, some of the brain gym exercises, whatnot. You could stop and get everyone to do that. And your families are going to love you for it because you're teaching them techniques they can take home and use with their families. You're teaching them techniques they can use with their children. A lot of these techniques are so fantastic for children in development. So doing them with your kids, and if you have a teenager that's not interested anymore, like I have, just do them in the same space as them and say, "Oh, I just need a minute. I'm going to organize myself." And then sometimes they'll join in, or sometimes just her feeling my energy get organized helps her to feel more grounded. Do you know what I'm saying? So
I
just
love,
one technique like that.
and it's a really great way to show our team that we care about them too, if we're allowing them to take just a few minutes at the top of every hour to take a step back. We're showing them that, yes, I care about myself, I care about my customers, but I also care about your well-being because I know that's something that is always at the top of our minds.
That's huge. And I'm so glad you said that, Michelle, because one of the ideas I had for this community is, when I used to run team meetings of, 12, 14, 8 people, how many ever people at the time, we would start every session with something called PACE. Now, PACE is a readiness tool. It's from Brain Gym. It stands for positive, active, clear, and energized. And do you want me to share that with your community now? Would that be helpful? Okay. So all you do is you start with a sip of water. We all want to be encouraging the water. And then we go into, and I'm just going to stand up with the intention of helping this be more visually available. So maybe, maybe not. So we put one hand on our belly button. The other hand makes a C. So I've got my thumb and my first finger right there. I'm going to take my thumb and my first finger and put it where my collarbones and breastbone intersect. I'm just going to rub that area. Now, we always joke that it's brain gym, not brain surgery, because if you're a little bit over here, a little bit over here, you're still going to get the benefit. Make sure your feet are grounded, whether you're standing or seated. You just want to have them grounded. Now this is the move that you could do at the top of the hour for everybody. The next one could be a standalone. It's the cross crawl. All children in early development need this, as do the grown-ups that support them. So what we're going to do is go into a cross body movement. So we're going to cross crawl. I'm reaching, goodness, my screen today. So I'm coming across, reaching across, and we could make this a bigger movement. There's all sorts of variations, but we want this cross body movement. And for the little kiddos, sometimes it's hard, and that's okay. We just hold space for them. And I'll talk about an idea to make it easier for younger children in just a moment. And then what we do, and you could cross crawl for a while. You can never OD on cross crawl. And then we're going to cross one leg over. I'm going to do this seated just because you might be doing it seated as well. And so we're going to cross one leg over the other. So my feet are just crossed at the ankles. You could cross your thighs, but just crossing at the ankles is great. Bring your arms out front like you're going to clap but miss. Then interlace the fingers, the palms face one another, and then bend your elbows and let them rest on your body. Now, sometimes adults have shoulders that aren't agreeable to this, or kiddos, it's a bit to coordinate. So I just say, make an X on your body. And then let's place the tongue on the roof of the mouth. So tongue on the roof of the mouth and hold and breathe. And then uncross and come to the center. My legs are uncrossed, my hands are here or here. So that 4-step process is a great readiness tool if you want kiddos to be able to have better attention. I did it this morning before we met because, the mornings I had a couple loads of laundry. I drove my daughter to school. I came back. I responded to some emails. And then I was like, well, I need to be in the present moment. So I did that sequence and some other nervous system regulation so that I could be fully present for this lovely community. So pace would be something at the top of every hour, or let's just even say it's cross crawl time. Maybe 12 o'clock is pace and then 1 o'clock is cross crawl. Now, if you have younger kiddos that are having a hard time figuring out how to go across, that's something to notice. We're not going to judge it. We're going to notice it, but take stickers as simple as smiley face stickers. Put a red sticker on the right hand and a red smiley face on the left thigh, and then a yellow sticker on the left hand and a yellow smiley face sticker on the right thigh so that they match yellow to yellow and red to red, for example, because it can be hard for kids and adults alike. I mean, I work with really highly developed, highly skilled athletes that sometimes cross body movements are challenging for them. And you'd be surprised, but it's telling us something about their nervous system. And it just means that we have some work to do. And that's where I come in.
I love
So
that example because a lot of us also, in addition to open play, we do classes, we do camps, we do drop offs. And a lot of times, I know for me, we would do like a 2-hour event, and the first hour would be play, and then the second hour would be some structured activity. So I absolutely love this as a transition from that more active free play to a more focused task where they really needed to slow down, readjust, re-regulate. I think that's a really great strategy that we can all use.
Absolutely. I love that. I mean, that's when I was thinking about these businesses, so many opportunities for having structured opportunities, even, after hours when the kiddos are maybe in play, like after school hours, and then they're being supervised with great play, and then have something separate for the parents, some sort of parenting opportunity. And even they would start with the pace. Like when I have the youngest kiddos I usually work with are about 10, but their parents bring them. And I'm like, oh, you're going to start with pace as well. We're going to do this together because I want the parents to have it in their body and they'll be more present. And your team, because they've been doing it earlier in the day, they started their day with it. And they're going to be in a space where they're ready to be fully present and engaged with the people coming into their amazing spaces. So, yeah, there's so many ways you can use this. And all of you are a creative bunch. So I'd love to hear how you're using it, when you're using it. And of course, if you have questions about application, I love questions. So send me the questions too.
Yeah, and again, I love the idea of empowering our team with this skill as well, because I know, obviously they're not paying the bills, they're not writing the checks, they're not paying rent, but they are dealing with the public every day. They are enforcing the rules. They are dealing with anger and confrontation. So, empowering them with this and giving them the time and space to practice these sorts of things can really not just only, take care of themselves personally, but it can really make them better team members as well, and have more patience, be a better reflection of your business. And it
Yeah.
sounds like it's very easy to implement and doesn't take too much time out of the day.
That is so true. And again, those frontline people are everything. And if they're happy and if they're grounded, they're going to speak volumes for your business and you're going to retain them longer, right? And that's what I love about nervous system regulation. Over in my space, I have all the wonderful Pilates apparatus, which I love and I'm grateful to have. But you don't need all of that. Sometimes we're using that to go a little bit deeper with nervous system regulation, but you can be anywhere. You can travel anywhere. You can be hiking and out in nature and doing your nervous system regulation because you don't need a ball or any fancy equipment. I know all of you have amazing, beautiful equipment in your facilities, but the thing is, the parent's going to feel empowered to take this home. Your team members are going to feel empowered because a lot of them may have their own families and they're going to take it home and share it with their children. And sometimes you just have to bring it to them in a way they can receive it. Like the kids may be like, oh, I don't want to do that. Mom does that at work. That's for, younger kids, the play space. But if you've got, a 15-year-old at home that loves soccer, you can say, oh, I hear that athletes do great with this. They do it before practice, after practice, and before a game. And so you just have to pack it in the right way for people at different stages and ages of life. But absolutely, I've been called into numerous corporate settings, Pilates studios, yoga studios, rehab facilities to get their team members the experience of this, almost like a retreat to get them trained and engaged in embodying this, because then they feel so much better when they go out into the world and provide those vital services.
Absolutely. And, above and beyond what we already talked about, taking care of them, being better employees, I think it also just reaffirms, I know we mentioned this before, but it reaffirms that you care about your people, you care about your team members, you're not just a boss, and you're not just a for-profit business, you care about your customers' well-being as well. I remember I used to work at Wegmans Food Markets at the corporate headquarters, and we used to have to do W stretches like every hour. They would play a song over the loudspeaker and we'd all roll our eyes and we'd get up and we'd have to do all these stretches. And again, it was, under the breath, like, I can't believe we have to do this. But then when I left, I really missed that. And I realized that not every large corporation, not every boss is going to let you take time out of the day to take a walk, to do the stretches. And even though at the time I didn't really appreciate it, it did let me know that, hey, this company cares about me. Like, sure, they want to check off these boxes on their list, but it did just tell me as an employee, especially when I, again, worked for other people and saw the other side of it. it did just show that, hey, this company cares about me and they're willing to allow me to stop whatever task I'm doing, be, quote unquote, unproductive for a few minutes and just take care of my body, recenter. And now I really regret not taking advantage of that more.
Yeah, I mean, experience and hindsight, right? I love that. And I think a lot of cultures, corporate cultures, are realizing they have to do this. Again, I've been going into corporations for 20 years. And it's funny because whenever they call and they want me to do a presentation, they say, we need a presentation to help reduce stress, but we don't want you to call it a stress reduction because they almost didn't want to fully acknowledge. And I would laugh and go, I would never call it a stress reduction because I don't want to focus on what we don't want. I want to make it about working with the tools you have within your nervous system and finding the ease and peaceful productivity. So I love that there are cultures that are doing things like that. And I think there's more and more of it. And again, all of you in this community can be at the forefront. If you have summer students working there that are working there as college students, or I don't know, high school students that are helping out that maybe want to go into early childhood education or something, or maybe they're going to go in a different direction, but for them to see that, wow, you're sharing tools like PACE and fear paralysis tapping, they're going to go, wow, when I look for that post grad first job, I'm going to ask them, what do you do to take care of your employees? How do you keep well being at the forefront of your culture?
Absolutely. So, are there any other techniques that you wanted to share before we kind of move on?
Oh my goodness, how much time do you have? I have so many techniques that I love to share. So I taught you the PACE. And again, just a couple of things, those can all be standalone. So the brain buttons are great if you've been on the screen for a while. Push away from your screen and do the brain buttons, ideally looking out a window or step outside. And then the cross crawl anytime you need energy and clear thinking. A hookup you can do anytime you want to feel organized, at peace. Now, I wouldn't do that whole sequence before bed because it can be energizing, but the hookup could be a standalone before bed. Now, because we're talking about survival and the stress and the mental load and the fight, flight, freeze, I'd love to teach you another reflex movement that's very tied to survival. So this is the Moro reflex. And the Moro, when you see those amazing photos of the babies coming out, the moment they come out and they're like, ah, and they're crying, like we want to hear them cry, right? We want to hear that sound when the babies are born. They do this. This is them in that survival mode. And then they collapse in, and you see them skin to skin, hopefully with mom or dad or whomever in that moment. And they're just in there finding safety. Now, the Moro reflex, I have different ways I teach it. A lot of my programs give variations, but I'm just going to show you the seated variation right now because it's probably easiest. And then if you go to my YouTube channel, I have standing versions. I have versions with the big ball. I love the big ball because my mid-spine loves an opportunity to open a little bit more. So I use the Moro for stress, for anxiety, when you can't take a full breath. I'm teaching a workshop on breath tonight, and this really helps with things that take your breath away. Like, I don't really watch the news, but if you do, you need to do this after because things will take your breath away in the world, right? So, all you want to do, and let me see if I can get this a little bit more. What I'm doing is I'm in sort of a goalpost position, or I'm a plant person, so I'll call it a cactus position. My elbows are pretty much at shoulder level, and I'm arching my back a little bit. Now, let's say your body doesn't provide for that in this moment. That's okay. Lift your chin, take your eyes up. Maybe your neck doesn't want to lift up. Just take your eyes up. I'm all about modifications. Now, what my legs are doing, if you can see, I'm just opening my legs to the side. Okay. Now, when we go to the next portion, I'm going to take my knees together. My feet are wide apart. If you can see that. So the second motion is actually this motion. I'm sorry. I thought I had set up my screen for better viewing, but we're going to fold in. We're rounding our spine with length. Arms are crossed across the chest and our knees are together if possible. Feet are wider than knees. And then we're going to open up again, chest open, legs open, knees open, legs are turned out, chin up, eyes up, arching the mid upper back. Hold it for at least 6 seconds and then fold in. And you would repeat this for adults. I really feel 4 to 6 times is necessary. For kiddos, they can do 3 and boom, their young little nervous systems pick it up. But this motion, anytime you feel stressed, Anytime you feel that you're getting back to that survival, push hustle mode, overwhelm mode, you can do that motion. And I also use it a lot for people that have upper spine issues. So from a biomechanical standpoint, it's really fantastic that reflex is tied to that. And that movement is just such a gift. If you did that, fear paralysis and pace every day, oh my goodness, your nervous system would feel probably so much more organized. Now, some of you are going to say, how long would it take? It depends. Where is your nervous system today? Where are you starting? If you've been living in that high cortisol stress mode for a while, it's going to take a while. It's like brushing your teeth. I like to tell people, get up in the morning, brush your teeth, do pace. Get to work, do your fear paralysis, do your Moro. Those are great ways to get really in the present moment, because really when we're in fear, we're probably spiraling about what's to come very often. So those three simple techniques, really it's more because PACE has 4 parts, are going to help you be more present. It's going to help you feel more organized, more clear thinking, and do it every day if you can. Now I know days are crazy, but you'll find the days that you do that. And again, they can take 2 to 3 to 5 minutes at most. You're going to find a different level of peaceful productivity, I think. So I can't wait to hear how it unfolds.
Awesome. And I'm definitely going to link your YouTube channel and all of the other resources that you mentioned in the show notes for anybody that is interested in diving deeper on this. But really quickly, before we kind of wrap up, I know you mentioned gut health and things like that. So can you give some examples of how we might want to venture into learning more about that to take more of a holistic approach?
Oh, yes. I love talking about this. So we really want to think about how are we nourishing ourselves, and the gut is very responsive to stress. So even if you have a really clean mostly diet, have some fun. I'm not saying, even though my husband jokingly calls me the food police, I'm not saying don't have fun, but I'm saying, like 80% of the time eat really nourishing in a nourishing way, and then 20% of the time have your fun. But the idea is when you're under stress, the gut's going to respond. It's going to dysregulate the flora, the bacteria in your gut. And the gut is known as the second brain. So that's why I'm so passionate about the nervous system regulation. So I'm a huge fan of something I call the crowding out principle. When you start adding in nourishing foods, maybe it's adding more greens, more vegetables that have prebiotics in them, because you want pre, pro, and postbiotics. You need all three of those, right, to really balance it out. So adding in those foods that can support that, as you add more of those in, maybe some of those other habits start to fade away. Some of the junk food starts to fade away because you're doing what I call a crowding out principle. Now, I am passionate about this because, again, I went through my journey with celiac situations there. But I also serve a lot of people that no one's talking to them about elimination. And by saying, "Hey, how's elimination going?" it kind of takes away the discomfort of talking about how they're pooping. So I talk to a lot of people. That is, you don't have to go have all the expensive lab tests. You may want to at some point, but just noticing, are you having difficulty? How are things happening in that arena? So I actually created a program called Poop Camp, which is really, it's not about the supplements, it's not about the food. We can talk about that in another arena, but it's about the nervous system regulation. Are you eating dinner, lunch with the saber-toothed tiger there? I used to be famous for this, eating my car all the time. I still do sometimes, but I check in first. Where am I at? Is the cortisol and the saber-toothed tiger right there with me when I'm eating? What can I do to dial it down? Well, you've got some tools now. Do pace first. Do the fear paralysis first. Do the fear paralysis a few times at that breastbone until you feel like, I'm not going to eat and swallow my anxiety, right? People talk about eating their feelings. I see, and I've seen this in myself, eating under such stress, like sometimes I have 15 minutes for lunch. And if I'm not going to be able to slow down and properly chew my food and eat, I'm just going to have a smoothie that I can drink while I'm working, because I need to be able to be present. I need to be able to be in that moment. And some of those reflex movements that I've taught, and there are others like spinal galant, spinal Perez, they really help to open up the trunk body so that all those organs are in a good place for elimination. And then I love teaching organ exercises. Part of my background, I'm a visceral manual therapist, so I do external gentle work, and very often I'm working on people's GI systems because they get irritated, they get inconsistent. And so I'm teaching them how to do it for themselves at home. Just do some exercises that release certain areas of the intestines so things are easy. Because when you're out of balance with the stress hormones like cortisol, you are going to find that your elimination is most likely affected. You could either have that cranky, irritable bowel, or you might be in that constipated place. And we can't talk about gut health without talking about that part of it because the elimination is really important. So I hope that answered your question. There's a lot of different things we could talk about there, but I hope it did answer the question that you had.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how you talk about how all of these things are kind of connected. And, what I love about this process is you can kind of start small. As you said, you can start with one thing and then move on to the next and then start adding on. So I really appreciate that because I know a lot of us, when we think about tackling something new, it's just overwhelming. So I love
Yeah.
that you can approach this, from a very simple standpoint. And then as you start seeing results and as you start working it into your routine, then you can add more steps. You can start looking at different facets of your well-being. So I really like that approach that you took.
Oh, thank you. It's really, again, like you said earlier, out of necessity. I know how I get overwhelmed. And when I'm supporting people, when I was a new grad, I was like, I'm going to give them 6 home exercises. I want to give them the world. But then I realized they were overwhelmed. So I'm like, how about 1 to 3? And I really read where they're at. And again, I might suggest someone, as long as they can handle fermented products. If they're dealing with cebu or something like that, they wouldn't. But I might suggest they add in some young Thai coconut water kefir because the whole kombucha thing is great, but it's really high in sugar. But just add a little ounce or two of that every day. Just do what you're doing and add an ounce or two every day. Notice what that does. And then when you have the bandwidth to add another piece, then maybe you do some of the exercises for the for the trunk reflexes rather, that help with elimination. So just little pieces at a time. And before you know it, you've got this whole layering of techniques that you're doing to support yourself in your gut. So it's a process, it's a long game. It's not something that happens like that, right?
Absolutely. But I mean, the time's going to pass anyways, right? And we can either be, succumbing to that chronic stress and slowly wearing our body down, or we can be taking small steps to improve it. So I love that way of thinking. And I'm going to absolutely link again everywhere that we can find you and learn more about your business in the show notes. But just to wrap up, do you have any last minute words of advice or anything you want to say to the people listening about this topic?
Sure. So I think my biggest invitation is, could you consider that everything you need to move forward away from the stress and to feel grounded and to feel whole and reconnected to your purpose and your joy is within you? Because it truly is. And that's what we all have, a nervous system. So we all have the possibilities that are available with nervous system regulation. And could we also give ourselves permission? Now, I know it may seem like a far reach to do 20, 30 minutes a day, and I'm not going to even ask for that because I get it. Some days I don't have that for my own self care practice. But could you consider taking the time to do one of these 1 to 3 minute techniques? Like this morning, I was so excited to have tea. Most mornings, I don't get tea except for maybe on the weekends because I don't have time to make it. But this morning, while my tea was steeping, I did pace and I was like, oh, it's a 3 minute steep for this kind of tea. What other nervous system tool do I want to do? So, could you give yourself permission to just sneak in? Maybe the water's boiling to make something. Maybe your dog's eating breakfast. I have a client who has 2 dogs, and when they're eating breakfast, she does a nervous system regulation tool. So, just keep in tune with the idea that everything you need is within, and you are worthy of giving yourself time and space and permission to do these little tools and let them start building up and supporting you in your journey.
I love that. And I think that is a perfect way to end. So I mentioned I was going to link everything, but where is the best place to learn more about you?
Sure, I hang out on Instagram a lot under inspired the number 2 wellness. And I think if you want to dive into some of the tools I have, I think the best tool would be my Inner Peace tool. That's the 3 videos, and you can get that at inspiredwell.com/inner peace. And that will take you, my website's inspiredwell.com. So those are the places, and you can get to my YouTube channel from there. So I share lots of content every week, and hopefully some of it will serve you. And then if you have questions, let me know, because that inspires the next piece of content that I share.
All right,
And
well,
thank you
thank
so
you
much
so
for
much.
having me.
I'm really looking
Thank,
forward to learning more. Thank you, Kelly.
thank you. And thanks for all you do for this wonderful community.
Thank you. All right, that wraps up my conversation with Kelly Hale. Again, I've linked all of Kelly's information and her social media accounts in the video description if you'd like to learn more. And if you ever have a clarifying question or a topic suggestion for this channel, I'm all ears. Please feel free to leave a comment under this video and let me know what you want to see. All right, I will see you soon. Bye for now.